hyperbaric oxygen, dietary supplements, urine therapy, ozone therapy, metal chelation. None of these have evidence to support their use for any ailment. I'm Dr. Andrea Love, biomedical scientist. I fact-check false health claims. Let's answer your questions from the internet. This is more pseudoscience support. Okay. First question. At Sentient Nazgul wants to know what's wrong with raw milk. God forbid it tastes better than store-bought. What's wrong with it? Well, a lot of disease-causing microorganisms. Pathogens like E. coli, Campylobacter, Brucella, and Salmonella. These are all bacteria that can be found in milk or living in cows. Before the pasteurized milk ordinance went into effect in the early 1900s, milk-borne illnesses accounted for about 38% of all foodborne illnesses. Now that we pasteurize milk and we don't consume raw milk, that level has dropped to 1% of all foodborne illnesses. 70% of milk-borne food outbreaks occurred in states that had permission to sell raw milk. So there's a reason that we pasteurize milk. Now, proponents of raw milk claim that it tastes better, or preserves the nutrients better, or it improves your immune system, and there's just no science behind any of that. You might think raw milk tastes better because you're drinking milk with a higher fat content compared to milk that you're buying at the store. But pasteurization, which is heating milk to a temperature of 161 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 seconds, has no impact on the nutrient quality of the milk. It does, however, have a huge impact on killing all of those disease-causing microorganisms that might be in your dairy. At Bob's blog wants to know, do artificial sweeteners actually give you cancer? Is that like Gwyneth Paltrow level health? Artificial sweeteners do not cause cancer. Aspartame is actually made up of 2 amino acids that are joined together, aspartic acid and phenylalanine. So when you ingest aspartame, they split apart and you use those amino acids to make proteins like you would with anything else you ingested. Aspartame is 200 times sweeter than regular sugar, so the amount that's needed to sweeten a beverage is minuscule. Based on extensive studies of aspartame, we know that in order to have even a minimal risk of harm, you'd have to drink up to 50 cans of diet soda in a single day. Now, I love my diet soda, but I don't think it's physically possible to even consume that much. You'd be far more likely to experience water toxicity from drinking that amount of fluid than you would by having toxicity from the aspartame. At Still Sick of It says, remember that time Joe Rogan interviewed RFK Jr. and said he believes vaccines cause autism? I do, yeah. RFK Jr. has spread the myth that vaccines are linked to autism for several decades, and it's a central feature of his organization, Children's Health Defense. That organization made over $23 million in 2022 alone. And in fact, recent investigative journalism has revealed that RFK Jr. himself was being paid over $20,000 a week as the chairman for Children's Health Defense in 2023 alone. The purported link to autism and vaccines has been debunked and addressed over 20 plus years. And there is no relationship. The biggest predictor for autism is having an immediate family member also with autism, which suggests that there's a strong genetic link. The prevalence of autism has increased, but this is a function of diagnosis. We have better, more appropriate diagnostic criteria to recognize autism cases, whereas in decades past, we were not capturing and recognizing how prevalent autism truly was. At Liza777777 wants to know, are GMOs/synthetic foods/vaccines harmful? There's a common perception that GMOs, especially food crops, are some unnatural thing that we've altered in a way that's harmful. But the reality is that humans have been genetically modifying and messing with nature since the dawn of time. Most people don't know that the vegetables we know to be cauliflower, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, and cabbage are actually all genetically modified versions of the wild mustard plant. They're the same species. Modern day GMOs allow us to do do this in a faster and more controlled way. At Chef Bai says, Dove has the best smelling deodorant. Bring on the aluminum and cancer-causing parabens because that shit smelled good AF. So the good news is that aluminum salts and antiperspirants and parabens don't cause cancer. So you can breathe a sigh of relief. Parabens are a class of antimicrobials, and they're used to inhibit contamination and inhibit the growth of bacteria and fungi that would contaminate a product that you're using repeatedly. And they've been used in these products for over 100 years. The levels at which you would be exposed to parabens are not posing any sort of harm. It's why they've been asserted and reasserted as safe for use. People have been led to believe that parabens are linked to breast cancer because there was a really terribly done study in the Journal of Applied Toxicology where they took breast tumor biopsies that were stored in the freezer and they detected minuscule levels. We're talking parts per billion of parabens in these breast tumor tissues. And when they looked at their negative controls, their blank values, levels of parabens detected in those were actually higher than some of the tissue samples, which actually suggests that their instrumentation was contaminated. So over here, we have 4 different types of parabens. Ethylparaben and methylparaben bind 100,000 times more weakly to estrogen receptors. So 1 versus 100,000 of your actual estrogen hormone estradiol. And butylparaben and propylparaben bind 10,000 times more weakly. So 10 versus 100,000 versus your estradiol hormone. So the likelihood of these paraben chemicals actually outcompeting your estrogen hormones is near 0. At RoboSox wants to know, are probiotics BS or nah? Unfortunately, they're more BS than they are evidence. Probiotics are a type of supplement that contain live microorganisms, but there's 40 trillion bacteria that live in your GI tract, and they make up hundreds of different species. The problem with probiotic supplements is they usually only contain 1, 2, or a small handful of species of bacteria. The reason that they're in the probiotic supplement is not because they've been identified to be beneficial for your health, but they're relatively easy to grow in large quantities, and so they end up in your supplement. But there have been a lot of studies that have evaluated or assessed the ability of probiotic supplements to improve health, and unfortunately, there's really no data to support their use. The stomach is very acidic, and if a probiotic supplement doesn't have what we call an enteric coating, those bacteria are very likely going to be killed by your stomach acids. So there's no data to even show that these supplements are even gonna make it into your intestines where they need to be. Prebiotic is another term that we often confuse with probiotics, but prebiotic is really just a fancy word for fiber. So prebiotics are the food that the bacteria in your gut are gonna use to do what they do. While you might see supplements that say they're filled with prebiotics, that's really just saying they're containing different types of fiber. And so you can get a lot of those health benefits that we know we need from fiber just by eating some fresh fruits and vegetables. At Words Matter wants to know, which pseudoscience has done the most harm? I would have to say anti-vaccine misinformation. It leads to the increased spread of infectious diseases, which means that we have increased amounts of morbidity, illness, and mortality, death among populations where those illnesses and deaths are preventable. For example, anti-vaccine misinformation about the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, the MMR vaccine, led to a spread and outbreak in Samoa in 2019 that caused the death of 82 people, primarily children under 5. Vaccines are estimated to have saved over 150 million lives in the last several decades. They truly are one of the miracles of modern medicine. At Reamerville wants to know, my doctor advised against ozone therapy. Is it helping people? No, it is not helping people. Ozone chemically called O3, is a type of oxygen compound that makes up parts of our atmosphere. Proponents of ozone therapy claim that it has a variety of health benefits. They inhale it, they use it in enema form, and in some cases, they will actually infuse it through a transfusion of your blood. Ozone has zero therapeutic benefits and can be potentially very harmful, especially if inhaled at very low doses. Your doctor is absolutely right. There is zero reason for you to expose yourself to ozone. At Logan Hens says, you don't detox from sweating. You sweat water and salt, not toxins. Doesn't make sense for said toxins to just dry on your skin, does it? Absolutely. Sweating is for temperature regulation. When you sweat, you secrete fluids, water, and some salts. And when that dries, it leads to a phenomenon called evaporative cooling, which means that your body now cools down as a result of taking that energy away. The way that your body gets rid of toxins is through your excretory organs. So your lungs, your liver, your GI tract, and your kidneys. Those organ systems are working all the time to remove any toxins or any substances that your body just no longer needs anymore. People like to tout saunas as a method to detox, but this is basically like accelerating your sweating process. A lot of people feel better after a sauna because the heat and the environment lets them feel more relaxed, but it has nothing to do with removing toxins from your body. At Milk16478, what the f is alkaline water, bro? You been drinking bleach or something? Proponents of alkaline water and the alkaline diet believe that increasing the pH of your body or reducing the acidity of your body can improve health outcomes. It can prevent cancer, it can reduce inflammation, but the reality is that you can't actually change the pH of your body. Your blood pH is very tightly regulated at around a pH of 7.4, and if you could change it, it would be life-threatening. And we can't change it because we have buffer systems that maintain balance in our bodies. And there have been a lot of studies that have tried to show a benefit, but there just isn't. The same goes for those at-home water ionizer equipment that you can pay $5,000 for. That is just adding extra minerals to your water, which is basically what alkaline water is. So things like potassium hydroxide, magnesium sulfate, calcium chloride. These are chemicals that increase the pH of water to a pH of 8 or 9 or so on. These substances are not offering any health benefits, and as soon as you drink this alkaline water, that higher pH is going to be neutralized by the acid in your stomach. Nisa Andrea asks, if the moon affects how the tide rolls in and affects dementia Alzheimer's patients, then why can't the stars affect human behavior and influence certain traits? This is a confusion of a phenomenon called sundowning, which is a situation in which dementia patients, including Alzheimer's patients, have worsening symptoms as the day progresses. Now, there's a few theories as to why this occurs, and some of it has to do with just the progression of the disease itself, but also the confusion that these patients are living with. The irritability grows as the day progresses, so they may appear to have worse symptoms as the day goes on. But it has nothing to do with the sun setting or the moon cycle. It's simply just that's later in the day. Unfortunately, there's no evidence to suggest that the stars and astrology has any impact on human traits and behaviors, and it's a long-held arm of pseudoscience. Jay Snowden wants to know, why are supplements pretty much unregulated, yet we strictly test the safety and efficacy of real medicine? Yeah, you can thank the politicians and the legislators of our US Congress. In 1994, they passed in a bipartisan effort the 1994 Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. Many senators have financial motives to pass this law, particularly Democratic Senator Tom Harkin and Republican Senator Orrin Hatch. Both of them received extensive amounts of lobbying money from dietary supplement companies in order to push this legislation through. What this did was it removed the oversight that the FDA had on dietary supplements. As a result, that industry has grown exponentially, and nearly all supplements on the shelves today lack evidence to support their use. Some examples would include a lot of your greens powders, things like AG1 and other dietary supplements claiming to give you your servings of fruits and vegetables, but when actually analyzing the composition of them, often they don't contain measurable amounts of those products, and worse, many contain substances that are not disclosed. At Mojo Pono wants to know, is it true that sugar in foods feeds cancer? There's no clinical evidence that eating sugar, avoiding sugar, or anything related to sugar has an impact in preventing or curing cancer. This misconception stems from the fact that we use a type of imaging called PET scan. So on a CT scan, you might detect a structure, but on a PET scan, we use a radioactive labeled sugar that's taken up by your body, and it lights up in regions where cells in your body are metabolizing that sugar more quickly. Because cancer cells do have faster metabolic activity, because they're growing very quickly, unfortunately, this has been misinterpreted to lead people to believe that sugar itself is causing cancer when it's just a feature of certain cancer types. Cancer cells will consume glucose at a faster rate because they need to take that glucose and make new cell components because those tumors are growing very quickly. So it's not the sugar that's feeding or causing cancer, it's a function of how cancer cells are using sugar that's available. A Bubblegum Monarch says, I knew receipt paper was thermal activated, but I didn't know that that coating is like toxic BPA. What? I handle that all day, every day. BPA, or bisphenol A, is a chemical that's used primarily to help manufacture plastics. In thermal receipt paper, it's used as a coating to facilitate that printing. There's a concern that this chemical may be implicated in endocrine disruption or interfering with your hormones. There have been some studies that suggest cashiers or other customer service people who handle lots of receipts over a working shift may be exposed to high levels of BPA, but that particular study used an estimate value in a modeling equation that was orders of magnitude higher than what any other data set would suggest. So they're skewing their data to overestimate how much BPA someone would be in contact with. BPA is the same chemical when people express concern about microwaving certain types of plastic. And just as is true with the receipt handling, the amount of BPA that might be in the food products that you microwave is going to be orders of magnitude lower than what you would actually need to be exposed to in order to see some sort of impact on your hormones. And on top of that, BPA is rapidly metabolized by your liver and excreted, so you don't have to worry about it accumulating in your body. At Brett NA 702-73495 asks, question for you, Andrea, if you don't mind. What common household chemical would you say you are definitely worth avoiding? I know I probably eat too much Teflon, but still buy nonstick cookware. For me personally, there isn't one thing that I have in my house that I would say I need to get rid of, but there are certain considerations. Say if you live in an older home and you might have some antiquated plumbing, you might want to get that looked at to see if there's high levels of things like lead, or if you have an old building that maybe has asbestos in the walls or the countertops. Since you mentioned Teflon, that's an interesting topic because it's gotten a lot of attention in recent months. Teflon chemically is part of the class of chemicals called PFAS. Now, PFAS incorporate thousands of different chemicals, and Teflon, chemically called PTFE, is a very long chemical and it's very stable. And so the likelihood of you actually experiencing harm from being exposed to Teflon by using nonstick cookware is actually very low. When people are stressing about these exposures to chemicals that generally don't have a big impact on their health, we should be redirecting our focus to things like healthy lifestyle habits, getting good quality sleep, eating a diverse diet, and staying up to date with your preventive health screenings, which really are the things that can impact your health. At Uncouth Primate wants to know, there's an emerging trend of people claiming that sunscreen is more harmful than good. Any thoughts? Let's clear up a few things. So the reason that sun exposure is a risk factor for cancer is because there are two main types of ultraviolet radiation, UVA and UVB. And these ultraviolet radiation energy essentially penetrates your skin. That energy is then transferred to molecules in your cells, which can cause DNA damage and mutations, and those mutations can ultimately lead to cancer the more you're exposed to it. By taking a sunscreen and putting some of it on your skin, the molecules of chemicals in the sunscreen now absorb that energy and convert that to heat. As a result, those ultraviolet rays don't get into those deeper layers of your skin. They're absorbed right by the sunscreen, and so your cells don't experience the damage. So people are saying that chemicals that you might find in sunscreens, particularly your organic filters like avobenzone, are causing cancer. And so it's causing more harm than doing good and preventing sun exposure. But these chemicals have been extensively studied for safety. There's no clinical evidence that they're linked to cancer in any way. At Daddy Pinks asks, wait, what do you mean there's arsenic and lead in tampons in the US? I hate it here. The good news is that this is blown wildly out of proportion. So there was a recent study that went viral and really scared a lot of people, but for no good reason. So this study took 20 individual tampons and they took the fabric and they digested it with high temperatures, 350 Fahrenheit, and an acid extremely concentrated to digest the fabric. And from there, they used analytical chemistry equipment to look at the levels of different trace impurities, arsenic, cadmium, lead, and so on. And they found very small quantities. We're talking parts per billion. And for context, 1 part per billion is equivalent to 1 second of time in 31.7 years. But I think we can all agree that 350 degrees Fahrenheit and a pH of 1 is not the environment of a vagina. For context, a vagina is about 99 degrees Fahrenheit and a pH of 4.5. So not only did this study actually show that you're going to be exposed to any of this, but the levels that they were detecting in the tampons are orders of magnitude lower than other things like tea leaves and water and cannabis. Tampons are made out of cotton, and cotton is a plant. And when plants grow in the environment, they pick up elements and substances that are in the soil and in the air and in the water. And that's where lead, arsenic, cadmium, these are all elements, right? They're part of our Earth's crust. So you don't need to freak out about your tampons or throw them away, but you also have to realize that this is something that is universal to all plants, including ones that you eat on a daily basis. At Al Bowers 1 asks, which vaccines contain mercury? None of the vaccines contain mercury. There's a preservative that's used to prevent contamination of vaccines with things like bacteria and fungi that is called thimerosal. And thimerosal is a salt of a different compound called ethyl mercury. Now, ethyl mercury is not mercury. It's a compound that contains a mercury ion. This was conflated to suggest that vaccines contained mercury. It's also further confusing because there's a different type of a mercury compound called methyl mercury. That's the one that we're warned about eating too much fish like tuna, because the methyl mercury is found everywhere and that can accumulate in our bodies. But to illustrate this, I want to talk about 2 different types of alcohol. So we have rubbing alcohol here, which is isopropyl alcohol, and we have champagne, which is ethanol. We know that ethanol is safe at relatively low doses, and many people enjoy a drink or two, but nobody's gonna drink a bottle of rubbing alcohol because we know that that would be toxic. The same is true for methyl mercury versus ethyl mercury. One of them can be harmful at a relatively low dose, and the other one can be safe at a relatively low dose. So thimerosal was used in several vaccines to prevent contamination, but thimerosal is not mercury. However, because of misunderstanding about this chemical difference, most vaccines ended up removing the thimerosal outright. The only vaccines in the US that even have thimerosal now are multi-dose flu vaccines, and those account for less than 7% of all flu vaccines being administered. At Hello H. Courtney asks, anyone hear of any alternative cancer treatments that work? There's a belief that scientists and healthcare providers are hiding natural treatments for a variety of diseases, including cancer. But you might be surprised to know that we actually often harness nature and improve upon it using science. Today, we have many different pharmaceuticals that target cancer that are actually derived from natural chemicals, and we tweak them to improve their safety, their efficacy, or reduce side effects. For example, a chemical called podophyllitoxin, natural chemical derived from the mayapple plant, is used in pharmaceuticals or in medical treatments, but we've also altered it chemically to create a chemical called etoposide. It's better able to treat more cancer types, and it has reduced side effects compared to the natural version. Another example would be something like paclitaxel, a natural chemical from the yew tree, and we've altered it chemically to create a compound called docetaxel. Docetaxel is often used to treat certain cancers like breast cancer, prostate cancer, non-small cell lung carcinoma, and certain types of head and neck cancer. And this is not something that's unique to cancer treatments either. Aspirin, which chemically is called acetyl salicylic acid, is actually derived from a chemical found in willow bark. Unfortunately, people who opt for unproven treatments for cancer have increased risk of poor outcomes. When you look at breast cancer survival, breast cancer patients that forego proven treatments have a 5.7 times increased risk of death compared to patients that use proven treatments. At Jason Q295178 wants to know, why are cancer rates in young people skyrocketing? The good news is cancer rates in young people are not skyrocketing. Unfortunately, there have been a lot of headlines that have said things to that effect, but this really requires context. Most of the risk factors for cancers are things that you actually can't control, and they relate to your genetics. But there are some that are impacted by modifiable risk factors. And so for many of these, cancer rates are actually declining. We're also seeing declines in cancer rates for lung cancer because of public health measures and smoking cessation education campaigns. We've seen a lot of headlines that have said that colorectal cancer is increasing 1% year over year in people under 50. But that is actually not the correct way to look at it. So to illustrate this, these are the colorectal cancer rates in the US by age group. And so colorectal cancer is the most common in older individuals compared to younger individuals, which is the case for nearly all cancers. Cancers are, by and large, a disease of aging. So the rate of cancer, these are number of cases per 100,000 people. In individuals for age 40 to 49, there's a rate of 37 cases per 100,000 people. So an increase in 1% means we've gone from 37 cases to 37.37 cases per 100,000 people. And when you look at the fact that there are about 150,000 colorectal cancer cases diagnosed every year, that means that we're seeing a few hundred total more cases in people under 50. Previously, colonoscopy was recommended for individuals 50 and above, but it's actually been reduced to individuals 45 and above. So rates are a function of the ability to detect cancers. So if we're screening more people within those younger age groups, we're also going to find more cancers. At Harrison H. Smith says, when you see citric acid on an ingredients list, did you know that you're eating an extract of black mold patented by Pfizer? So this is not true, but it underscores misinformation about how we manufacture citric acid. Citric acid is used in foods to give it a sour taste. So it's used in candies, but it's also used in seasonings and spices, pickles, ketchups, vinegars, mustards. It gives everything that nice little sour flavor. Every organism creates citric acid as part of their basic metabolic process. That's why in the cell respiration pathway, we have the citric acid cycle. So we harnessed this fundamental principle of all organisms, and we use a specific species of fungi called Aspergillus niger. We grow up mold in really large containers and we give them molasses. And as they're metabolizing the molasses, they're producing citric acid during the citric acid cycle. And so we harvest that citric acid from the liquid that the mold is growing in, and there's no mold in it. Aspergillus niger is technically a black mold because it produces a pigment that gives it a black coloring. But the color of a mold has no bearing on whether it's a harmful organism or not. And there's lots of black molds that exist, including many that we eat in foods every single day. Tofu or soy sauce or koji, these are all produced using black molds. At AG Huff wants to know, does chronic Lyme disease exist? This is a very controversial topic, and unfortunately Lyme disease has actually been plagued with controversy since it was first identified in the 1980s. Lyme disease is an acute infection by bacteria called Borrelia burgdorferi that are deposited into your skin through the bite of certain species of ticks that are infected with it. So when you get Lyme disease, you take antibiotics such as doxycycline, which will eliminate the bacteria and clear the infection. The phrase chronic Lyme disease is used in two contexts. The first refers to symptoms that may persist in a small proportion of people after you finish that antibiotic treatment. This is correctly termed post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome, and it occurs in about 3 to 5% of people with legitimate Lyme disease. And this has to do with the fact that the bacteria may have caused some direct tissue damage and your immune system takes some time to return to baseline. So you may have some symptoms for a period of time. This is not unique to Lyme disease either. Nearly every infection that we know of, there's a small proportion of people that may have lingering symptoms after the infection is gone. Context 2 refers to a persistent infection that is ongoing and is long-term. There are many organizations that promote this unfounded theory, and what they do is they recommend and prescribe treatments that have no evidence and are potentially harmful, including long-term courses of antibiotics. Now, clinical trials have demonstrated that there's no therapeutic benefit of extending antibiotic treatment for this bacterial infection, yet people still prescribe these. And this can lead to serious consequences like sepsis and opportunistic infections because you're taking antibiotics for too long. They also promote a variety of unproven wellness interventions, things like colloidal silver, bee venom therapy, urine therapy, enemas, herbal supplements, hormone treatments, metal chelation, and a variety of other interventions. Not only do these things have no evidence to support them for any ailment, they certainly don't have evidence to support them for the treatment of a persistent infection that does not exist. This is why scientific expert agencies like the CDC have revised their phrasing to discourage the use of the term chronic Lyme disease. At Lod63 wants to know, what are your thoughts on leaky gut? Is it real? If so, what is the best way to address it? So leaky gut, sometimes called increased intestinal permeability, is a diagnosis that is promoted by a lot of wellness influencers. Like all pseudoscience diagnoses, has a little bit of truth behind it. So there are certain legitimate gastrointestinal diseases like celiac disease or ulcerative colitis where the pathology of the disease causes disruptions in how your intestines function. But wellness influencers have extrapolated that to tell people that your intestines just broadly become permeable and allow undigested food particles, toxins, and bacteria to get into your bloodstream and cause a really laundry list of symptoms, everything from GI upset to brain fog and hair loss and weird food cravings. There's no evidence to support this diagnosis, and there's no evidence to support any of the tests and the treatments that these wellness influencers promote. This is a hallmark of pseudoscience. They create a medical condition that they can sell a test for, and then they can sell you the treatment for. Don't fall for it. At Traveling Jeans says, hey, James Quincy, as the CEO of Coca-Cola, did you allow your own children to grow up drinking Coca-Cola? Or is your preference that only other people's kids be exposed to high fructose corn syrup, which has harmful effects on the liver, mirroring alcohol consumption? So high fructose corn syrup is very poorly understood. So what we do is we take the glucose that's normally 100% of corn syrup, and we take an enzyme called glucose isomerase, and we convert about 50% of it to the other simple sugar, fructose. So now you have in high fructose corn syrup a mixture of about 50% fructose and 50% glucose. I bet you didn't know, but that ratio of glucose to fructose is almost identical to the ratio of glucose to fructose in honey and the ratio of glucose to fructose in table sugar or cane sugar. High fructose corn syrup is not any worse than honey or any worse than sucrose or table sugar. These are all just sugars. Your body views them and digests them and processes them essentially the same way. Your body needs sugars for optimal function, but anything in excess, including sugar, can be harmful at a high enough dose. At Je suis Belle 1 asks, why are people refusing to go through body scanners at the airport because of radiation? Damn it, don't you have a cell phone? Cell phones use radio frequency radiation, and body scanners at the airport use millimeter wave radiation. Now, when we're talking about radiation, it all refers to different types of energy. The type of radiation that body scanners and cell phones use are down in the radio frequency range. These types of radiation waves are very long and have very low energy, which means that they're non-ionizing. So when they interact with your body, they're not able to actually cause any damage to your cells or your tissues. Cell phones and body scanners don't contain types of radiation that are going to cause you harm. A lot of people confuse or are scared of the phrase radiation because we know that there are certain types of radiation, high energy radiation like gamma radiation, that can be ionizing. These are high energy, they can cause damage, but your radio frequency and your body scan radiation is very low energy. At Sarati Ball wants to know, are underwire bras still suspect as a cause for breast cancer? Definitely not. Scientific experts have actually never suspected that underwires are a cause for breast cancer. The logic is that something tight around the lymph nodes and the breast tissue was leading to toxin accumulation, which was then causing breast cancer. There's no scientific plausibility to this, and it ignores basic concepts of physiology and how compounds and toxins and our lymphatic and cardiovascular, our blood system actually works. Now, if you don't want to wear a bra, do you, but don't omit wearing a bra because you've been told that it causes cancer. At Lori Smith 1962 says, carnivore diet is healthier for humans and better for the environment than being a vegan. So this is just objectively false. The carnivore diet is based on the premise that you should only be consuming animal products. That includes meat, animal fats, and eggs. And this diet omits food groups and nutrients that we know are critical for health, including fiber. Carnivore diet is nearly devoid of fiber, and fiber is essential for proper GI function. It's also critical to help regulate levels of blood lipids, and it's also really important for your overall immune system health. If you're adhering to a diet that doesn't have fiber and doesn't have things like fruits and vegetables, you're running the risk of severe nutrient deficiency and adverse health effects, including increased risk of GI issues, certain types of cancers, and cardiovascular issues. So those are all the questions for today. Remember, false health information travels 6 times faster than credible facts, usually because it's scaring you and exacerbating your health fears. We all can play a role in helping to combat and fact check health disinformation. Thanks for watching Pseudoscience Support.